gentlemen, welcome back as we start our season 2 of HT Dialogues with the Thought Leaders. Our topic of discussion today is the big shift to bridge the learning gap. 2 years of bedroom Zooms, hybrid learning, and quarantines has upended every corner of the education world. January 2021, Azim Premji University study of students from classes 2 to 6 concluded that 92% of children had lost at least one specific language ability from the previous year, and more than 80% lost at least one mathematical ability. They have regressed. With schools having reopened and getting into the new academic session, our teachers have a lot of work to do. There is a sense of urgency to hit the ground running. In the short term, the challenge is just filling the learning gap, but it is the long term in which the effects could be more profound. Hence, it is essential that we adopt a faster, smarter, and efficient way of teaching in order to mitigate these effects. Is there any learning backed by research or a playbook that could help fill these gaps? Or is it for the principals, educators, and teachers to self-ascertain the learning loss, student by student, and come up with a big shift needed plan in order to bridge the learning gaps? Today, we have with us top educators to share what is being done and what could be done to fill in the gaps faster. I would like to welcome Dr. Amita Mullavatal, Chairperson and Executive Director, DLF Foundation, Gurugram, former principal at Springdale School, Pusa Road, for more than 20 years. She is also the Chairperson of Global Inclusive Education Network and is on the National Advisory Council for Teacher Training. Ms. Richa Agnihotri, Principal, Sanskriti School. She has helped develop the CBSE CCE handbook for teachers and formulate the CBSEI curriculum for science. She has also been a recognitions ambassador for the IB in India and is a certified trainer with Cambridge International Examinations. Dr. Sushmita Ram is an associate professor, Department of Elementary Education, Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi. Teaching for more than 25 years, Dr. Ram is very passionate about developing teachers as active, reflective practitioners. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you. My first question is to you, Ms. Agnihotri. After 2 years of being in front of the screens, the students have now come back to school, and I think it's about 6 weeks they are back. So are there any major learning gaps that we've been able to identify thus far?
Thank you for that question, Rupali. I think I'd like to begin by saying, and I think I say that for all of us, that we're delighted to have the children back. We're delighted to be back in school. So yes, it's too early to point out, major learning gaps and to give you details, but there are some glaring things which I can sort of share with you. The first one is, and I'll start with the little ones, the littlest ones, the tiniest, the 3 and 4 years old. What we've noticed is that their fine motor skills are good. Because they've probably been engaging at home with toys and playing with things, crayons, and mom's been giving them stuff to do. But their cross motor skills are scary because you find them, they're not able to walk, confidently. They can't climb little tiny slides. They can't climb those slides. They're scared to go on swings. They're not running around the way little children do once you. So those are some gaps that we see right away. We saw them the first day they came. Because they've been on the screen and for a while, and they could switch off the camera if they wish to. So this the routine of sitting in a class for a long period of time, that's gone away. Routine in general has gone away. So they're now then unable to sit for long periods of time. So we do allow them to at the end of a class or 10 minutes early, take a walk, come back. Concentrating on a large period, for a large period of time, reading something, attention to detail, that's missing because again, they haven't had that practice for a while. Writing skills is something that has really, it's taken a toll on the writing skills because a lot of work was given online, and while they were writing, there wasn't this regular checks on their writing. So to be able to sit for 3 hours and take an exam, that's going to be tough. And they are finding it tough. I mean, for nothing else, they're just fatigued writing. So, and of course, the skill of writing, that's been impacted a lot. But I think most importantly is the socio-emotional skills. So, the ability to interact with peers, to be able to interact comfortably with adults, to meet your eye and converse with you, engage with you for a long time, those kind of conversations, to work in a team, to manage conflict, all those areas have been affected. And you see that across, all age groups of children. And a lot of them are anxious about coming back to school. Many of them have expressed their anxiety, and we are allowing them to come for smaller periods of time, go back, and then the next day come for a longer period of time. So those have been some areas that we've just been able to see for now. But I'm confident that if they're in school for another 2-3 months, I think these things will be taken care of, and slowly they'll get into the groove. And of course, teachers are keeping a careful watch, and so are parents. So I'm hopeful that this is a transient phase.
It's really nice to know that, while of course the gaps look massive in various age groups, but the confidence I think that you're showing, and I'm sure all the teachers are on it, it'll really build that back. My next question is to you, Dr. Ram. The schools have been navigating, and coming up with a comprehensive plan to catch up with the students. Now, is this based on any kind of study or any research analysis that has happened, basis which these catch-up plans are being created by the schools?
See, so far, some of the researchers, very few researchers, which have talked of learning loss, have been summer learning loss. So there has been learning loss because of the summer break. And there are very few cases, like the Ebola virus or some disaster where children have not been able to go to school, but not much research in this particular area. Having said that, I would also like to add here that researchers in India have shown less learning even before the pandemic. So we are, and I think somewhere the pandemic has made us more aware that there have been learning losses. But even with children going to school, especially the marginalized children, it's important to understand that there were huge gaps of learning, huge gaps in learning, even before. And I hope while we're looking after the pandemic and on the basis of the pandemic, the marginalized children belonging to remote areas would get that benefit of how to create, better learning. The pandemic was unprecedented. Nobody planned. I mean, it was completely unknown. We didn't know for how long. There have been huge losses. The losses have increased, but they've increased more again for people in remote areas, children in remote areas, children of the marginalized, children who had to leave home. And I would say that there has not been enough time to understand which method, which strategy, what kind of reading would help. So I think the good part is that the government and that schools are trying very hard.
Sure.
And, to do things to help children across disciplines, across age groups. And, you won't have the same kind of learning loss in every discipline, some more than the others. And I think that should be marvelous.
Sure. Thank you. So I do hear you say that, of course, for the marginalized communities, the losses are much larger. And of course, it's the same for the cities, maybe slightly less, or as far as the losses are concerned. Coming to you, Dr. Vatal, we see that, as Dr. Ram also just mentioned, the schools are putting their best foot forward. They're working really hard to bridge these learning gaps. And we do not have a playbook as such to fill in these learning gaps. Do you think, is there any big shift plan that we have to bridge these learning gaps, a faster, a smarter way to reimagine education as we have just reopened the schools?
That's an interesting question, and it's wonderful that I have practitioners all of us are practitioners here, and I always believe that experientially, it's a practitioner who understands classroom transaction more than anyone else. After having listened to what Richa has mentioned and also what Sushmita has talked about, and she's talked about a larger group of children across the country, I think what I've seen is that, what ultimately is the new normal. We keep talking about that term. I think for a very long time, we have pressed pause on it. So it's time we reset things. Yes. And we reset things essentially in the field of education. Because as far as we're all concerned, that is one field that has really been hit in a very huge manner, particularly with children who are from the economically weaker sections, and even amongst privileged children. Because it's a misnomer to say that, Delhi has had, or capital cities have had, all children attending classes. And so in fact, according to a new World Bank report, it's a very minuscule group of children who really attended schools. And I'm sure that my friends here will agree with me. So having said that, why am I saying let's press this reset button? Because one thing we've realized is that each child has a very deep, personalized learning threshold. And so we need to start making learning more individualized for children. And I think that's an important aspect we have to come back to, because it's very difficult to bring in, at least in a classroom, you can still strive to bring in individualized learning, but certainly not online. Though we talk about the fact that technology helps a lot, but technology is not that. It merely amplifies things. It simplifies and amplifies. It does not create learning for you. So I think that is where we have to see, how do we bring back children into the fold, and how do we work towards this? I think the biggest aspiration is that we have to move from the understanding of academic excellence to thriving. How do children thrive in this whole area of learning? And so what I think personally is that we've all inherited a planet, but unlike other creatures, we create our learning. We create cities, we create civilizations, we create art, music, literature. So I think one of the big shifts that we have to start looking at is imagination, enhancing imagination. The more imaginative our children will become, the more creative they become. A lot of imagination has taken a big hit during the online classes. The other aspect is that I think that we should also look at the way we look at pedagogies. We should look at the way teacher training happens. We should sort of rework this whole model. And in fact, I would say that as far as grades are concerned, we should stop these annual grade assessment. We should look at what NEP talks about, two, three stages of learning, right up to grade 8. So we have a learning progression, so we can identify children who've fallen in the cracks. So I'll rest my case here and wait for the other question. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Vatal. So as I understand that, there are these gaps that also exist as far as emotional learning is concerned, or motivational learning is concerned, and there are these gaps at every level, and I think every stakeholder needs to commit to be able to make this big shift. Yeah. So my next question is again to you, Dr. Vatal. So teachers have been at the center of this entire developmental learning program that we also so hear about now. So what is it that they're really focusing on as far as this developmental learning is concerned? Are they prepared to make the shift? Are they equipped? Is there any kind of training and support that they will really need, or is it just the way it is and it'll work out on its own?
I think the last 2 years has been very difficult on teachers. In fact, I think they've been troopers as far as the work that they've been doing with children is concerned. Previously, they had to completely unlearn and relearn, which we keep talking about. It actually happened, Richa. So they had to do that because suddenly from, everybody said, oh, I'm technologically savvy, but you actually realize you weren't, you're a bit of a dinosaur. perhaps the very young, but even then, to actually bring in online learning into a classroom and make it a completely, cyber kind of a class was really a difficult situation. So they leapt into that, and they got down and they worked hard. And then it became just an online class, and then a certain amount of exhaustion came into the whole process. A certain amount of complacency came in, and I don't blame them, because ultimately, how much, as you said, the children keep staring at a screen? How much can a teacher not only stare, but also keep saying, hey, put your camera on, hey, put your audio on, and you know that half the time they're not really interested, and the camera is really, there's no problem with the network. It's really they're tired of us. We're the network they're fed up of, so to speak. So I think the teachers now have to again go back to another system. And this time the system is again uncertain, because you can't just say, okay, hey, I'm going back. It's back to business as it was 2 years before the pandemic. So I'm just going to get in there and start teaching. No. In fact, the entire teaching learning model has to be completely revamped, as I said. And so in that, it is very imperative that apart from those regular CBSE trainings that one is having, I think the head of school has to ensure that, that there is a complete school audit on their teachers' abilities and skills and competencies. Once that audit is taken, then they will realize what is it that who needs what. So the point here is even teachers need individualized and personalized help, because each teacher is different, each subject transaction is different. And here teachers also need to not only look at the way they transact their subjects, but it's a very different world now, because it's more about how children feel, as Richa said. So how do they interact with the emotional quotient of the child? What is the compass of the child? Does the child really want to listen to you? Does the child want to come back? So you have to magnetize them back into your life. And magnetism doesn't come with just subject learning right now. It comes with, as you mentioned, with motivation. It comes with care. It comes with understanding the importance of resilience. It comes with understanding that children have gone through huge amounts of adversity, as you have. Many teachers have lost their spouse, so many children have lost their families. So I think it's become a sort of a 360-degree way of how we look at learning. I think we have to really look at the learning commons in a very different manner, more so in an emotional, social, adversarial manner, rather than just as a subject-driven, examination-driven manner. So that's the reset. So there's a learning continuum that we must constantly be involved with, and that is only happening if teachers are trained. And I hate the word, as you rightly said, Susmita, how do you use the word trained? I mean, unfortunately, you train animals, you don't train human beings, So how teachers are empowered, how they're helped, how they're scaffolded. True. So that's what I feel.
True. I like this, what you just mentioned about, we should maybe have an audit and help teachers, and how do we empower them. So would this responsibility lie with the school, the principal, the administration, or is there anything that's being worked out? Because I mean, that's a very interesting point, and I have not...
So thank you for that. It's a layered thing, and I'm sure that both my colleagues would agree with me. It's not just one person. You're not working in silos.
Yeah.
Life is about, working in a sort of a network. So I think, the interesting concept that we've worked on hub schools. So there are cluster schools where, there are clusters where you can share each other's resources. Because, teaching now being just, my class, my thing, the whole thing is out. Teamwork is extremely important. And not only teamwork in just, say, a Sanskriti school, but teamwork across schools. So we need to do that because we need help. So I think it's be layered. It's what the boards help you with the kind of training the boards do, the kind of training that your school personally does, and the kind of training that may happen in a Sahodya group, it may happen in your other national progressive groups that you're involved with, and your own cluster groups. So you have your own zonal cluster groups where you can share each other's
knowledge sharing is something that could really
That's
help.
the way, but it should be consistent.
Sure. Thank you for that. Ms. Agnihotri, my next question is to you. Teachers, of course, we know are playing a very critical role, and are pivotal to the whole developmental learning. Do you think bridging this gap or making this shift is a collective responsibility of parents and teachers together? Because teachers possibly can't do it alone. So what would be your message to the parents in case that is the case?
I think what's been really nice the past 2 years is that, all this while sort of teachers were sort of co-parents when children came to school. But the last 2 years, parents have been co-teachers for these 2 years. So other than the fact that they've started appreciating school and teachers a little more, they've also understood their own child better. And they've also seen the wide diversity that exists within a class. Now, some of them were mindful of it and knew how to engage with their child, keeping that diversity in mind. Some of them got anxious with it. Why is my child not answering? This one's answering, why aren't you not answering? So there was undue pressure on the children. I've also had older children come to me saying, I just want to come to school to be away from my mom. So, and mom's coming and saying, I want the child out of the house. There's no way that I can, now continue to live like this. So there's been that, and it's been a good time for parents to understand what education and learning is all about. And as, Amita said, that they have to thrive. So it's not just about academic grades.
Sure.
So I think the fun thing is that parents have always been partners in bringing up. They say that it takes a whole village to educate one child. So it's not just parents, it's the entire community. But yes, some of the things that I think parents should do, I think the first one is send them to school. So they must start sending children to school. There has to be a trust in your own child to be able to look after himself or herself. Trust in the way the school is providing, safe support, safe space for the children to be in. School is a big equalizer. So it also sort of, there are a lot of other learning skills which schools teaches you, and parents need to appreciate and accept that. Other than that, this whole focus on grades and marks and those expectations, those have to go, because like I said, there are various other sort of upheavals that the children have gone through and families have gone through. There's not a single family which has not been touched by the pandemic. So parents have to now sit down and communicate with their children. They need to talk to them. They need to understand where they come from. They need to understand where they're going. There has to be constant open communication without this undue pressure on grades and marks.
Absolutely.
So if that happens, and if they trust schools, and if they start sending children to school, I think things will sort of really work in the favor of the child. And that's what parents and all caregivers really are only looking at, the development of the child in a more holistic and a more safe space. So yes, parents have a responsibility. I want to also give you the other aspect of it, which is parents who are from the economically weaker section, or the child is a first generation learner. That support will have to be provided by school and by other parents as well.
How interesting.
So what Amita talked about, we have to set up a community of caregivers, and not necessarily teachers or hubs of school, but parents and the rest of the community, because we all have to support the child wherever they come from. So yes, let's see how that works.
So I love this whole thought of, how post-pandemic, I think this is one of the great things that has emerged, thinking not just grades, possibly counseling parents that, it is not grades that is so important. And, and hold this collaboration between the marginalized or the privileged kids and the schools bringing everybody together. What a beautiful learning, or what that's emerged from this whole pandemic, post the pandemic. My question is to you, Dr. Vatil. Students have been in front of the screens for so long. It seems they've been programmed to only look at screens and have been looking at a barrage of images and PPTs for very long hours. Do you think they could have lost the skill of thinking or ideating? Is there a way we can think about rewiring their brains? And is there any design thinking tools that can help them unlearn and relearn the whole thinking process?
I think there's been this huge rhetoric that education is catastrophically broken, Okay. I think we have to really step back and take a breath. And because if you start thinking that things are broken, then you work in a very quick fix manner. And you don't have time for reflection. You don't have time for dialogue. So nothing is broken. It's just been set into a different mode. And children are extremely resilient. I agree completely with what Richa had mentioned, that, cognitive and non-cognitive skills have been affected in a huge manner. The fear of repetition, as she mentioned, mathematics, language, all that has certainly been affected by the constant, staring at the screen, alliteration. But the non-cognitive skills, which is again clarity of thought, being able to communicate, understand conflict, be able to sort of create and imagine, that's been affected in a very, very big manner. So yes, and that's why I think the whole idea of what you mentioned, design thinking, must come in. Because design thinking will certainly help children to look at things in multiple ways. And the teacher within the classroom has to be engaging enough. And that is what, as she said, children have to come back to school. Unless they come back to school, we can't bring these things back into focus. And I'm particularly primary children. And right in the beginning, I would go back to what was being said by Sushmita, that, especially children from poorer sections, a lot of them have completely lost 3 years of any kind of learning. And so at least if they get back and we bring in non-cognitive learning and then sort of scaffold it with cognitive learning, and then look at networking of how they look at learning in different ways, I think that will help children to be able to sort of communicate with themselves, because the ability to also know what is it that you want is not there anymore. What is it that you need? Earlier on, a child was very clear about their skills in many ways, their abilities, and they were very confident. I know this, I know that. Today, the only confidence one sees is of putting on the computer and putting off the computer, or sending messages, or obsessing about apps. There's so much more to life than that. So the ability to create friendships, the ability to think out of the box, without pressing Google and asking for answers, all that is extremely necessary. And I think that's what's affected by children staring at the screen. And I think it will come back when teachers work with them, engage with them, and parents understand that that is what they require, not coming back to business as usual with regular schools and texts and contexts and such.
Nice. So I think it's collaboration again, with the teachers, students, schools, everybody coming together. My question is to you, Ms. Agnihotri. Is there any message that you have for students as they come back? Is there a refresh button that they can press to embark upon this whole journey of catch-up learning or progressive learning? What would you like to tell them?
What I like to tell you, Rupali, it should be the other way around. We should actually have had a child sitting here and telling us what do they want. I agree with what Amita said, that, we are sort of sitting over here and adults are taking a lot of decisions on what children should be doing, how they should be doing, what should they be studying. We really don't know what they're going through. So I think I agree with you completely there, Amita. They have to come back to school. So I think the first thing I tell children is come to school. And doesn't matter if you're anxious, doesn't matter if you're worried about your grades or your performance in English or your ability to, do well in your debate club. Just come to school. Come to school to communicate your thoughts. Talk about your feelings. Talk about what's bothering you. Talk about what you went through the 2 years. Talk about what has changed intrinsically within you. And how we as adults should now look at you differently. And are you different, and why are you different? So I think children should come and communicate with every adult or with peers. So I would really like to hear from them, what is it that they... So I think the first thing is that they come to school and they start with a routine. So I would really urge them to come back to a routine, and the routine doesn't have to be get up at 4 a.m. and, learn your tables. But it's about a routine of school and of friends and of, your hobbies and things that you enjoy, and, walk in the park or play or gym or sing or dance, whatever is it that sort of catches your fancy. So I think they have to get back to that without like a switch on and switch off button, but gently weave their way back into whatever, I won't even call it weave their way back, weave their way into what they want now, to be what they want to do. So they need to come, they need to communicate what they feel. They need to start looking at learning. Again, I love the way Amita said, it has to be thriving. So they have to look at learning not, with the idea of a career or of a grade or of a 95% or a 99%, but look at learning because they enjoy that, because they like what they're doing, because they enjoy what they're studying. And we are hopeful that with NEP, and there's a lot of talk now about flexibility in Delhi University and universities as well, that they will get that opportunity to do something different and work their way differently. So I think they have to stop stressing about grades, stop stressing about their profile or building their resumes and college applications. They need to introspect. They need to explore themselves. They need to discover themselves. They need to talk to themselves. They need to talk to their friends, their peers. They need to work in teams, work in groups, and really enjoy the process of growing up. And I know it's very cliched, but it's not going to come back. And so 2 years have been taken away, but they have it. Like she said, it hasn't been catastrophic, and let's not even treat it like that. It's been different, and they need to sort of find their way in a way that they weren't allowed to earlier. And so therefore, it's more for adults and more for teachers and parents to sit down and think and sit down to listen to what young children have to say. So I would just say, if you're in college, go back to college. If you're in school, go back to school. Look at things that you want to do. Identify yourselves, express yourselves, and stop obsessing about grades
Also
and
nice
absence.
to hear, and I hope the parents and students who are listening to this conversation are open to, and it builds their confidence to send their children back to school.
Yeah.
And there should be no fear amongst these students now if we have principals and educators and you who are ready to welcome the students with open arms and let them be.
And I think
explore.
The one other thing which I find is sort of everyone's upset about is social media. And I think it's time that adults use social media more positively. And there's a lot more to social media than just Facebook and Insta. And I mean, those are the only two things I know. And I'm sure the younger people would know more and say that's old. But I think it's also time that we look at that and use that more positively in the life of the child, because that is an important part of her life.
Thank you for those lovely words. And again, I hope parents and students who are listening to this conversation, please get back to school soon. Everybody is waiting for you with open arms. My question is to you, Dr. Ram, now. Schools in US and in other countries abroad open much earlier than when we've reopened. So we often hear that they've embarked upon accelerated learning programs versus we're talking about developmental learning in India. So is there any learning from there that can be picked or that can be used here in our country at all?
I think different countries have their own educational needs. And it's very important to focus on that, to look at contextual learning, to look at contextual issues, rather than just talking about, which country has done what. And we tend to ape another country very often and very easily. I'll just give you 3 examples. For instance, in UK, they are spending a huge amount of money, 1 billion. They've extended 1 billion pounds. They've extended the school hours, but that is more, and as you were saying, for physical outlets, so extracurricular activities. They've also introduced a national tutorial system. So they're getting people who are trained graduates to come and help the teacher. Unlike what we're saying in India, the teacher has to do all this. Teacher has to bridge the gap. So here, they're thinking of getting other people, and they've earmarked a certain portion for that. So they come into and help the students to move that little distance, that little gap, to do that. In Cambodia, they're looking at remedial teaching. They're using the word remedial teaching, though I think remedial doesn't have good connotations. It's, bad for the child, and it's no fault of the child here. But they're looking at mathematics, particularly. Okay, in Finland, during the pandemic, age groups till 3rd grade, they were coming to school regularly. During the pandemic, grades 9 and above were given laptops we can't afford to do that. I mean, you look at sheer numbers, you look at what India is. So I think we need to look at where we are, what are our needs, and work on that. There have been a number of programs, where they're looking at assessment and then working from assessment. Let's assess where the child is. I give you an example of, in social science, you learn how to map. But mapping has prerequisite skills. So it's very important to, rather than assess a child on mapping and giving a grade or a mark or a label, it's better to just start in the class, take the child for a walk, ask the child to map the classroom and move from there. Why do we need to assess at all? It's because we are adults and they're vulnerable. We always feel that we need to tell you what to do. I completely agree with you. I think children need to come to school to just be. They need to come to school to feel that freedom. In fact, last year, my students were teaching online. My interns were teaching online. And they asked, "School ka kya yaad hai tumhe?" बच्चों को पूछा. And the children said, वो दोस्ती मिस कर रहे हैं, साथ बैठ के खाना मिस कर रहे हैं. किसी ने भी ये नहीं कहा कि मुझे मैथ्स की याद आ रही है या मुझे इंग्लिश पढ़ना है या साइंस करना है. But that is what is important. And I'm going to probably repeat what you're saying, but I think that even in India, where children have had so much of loss, learning loss, they are confined into the household, into the house. Many of our children have gone back into child labor. Let's not forget them. There will be many, many cases of malnourishment. These are equally important. And why do we say that education is only what the school teaches us? Each child gets educated as he, she, whoever, they live through life. And that, I think, the schools should recognize, that the parents should recognize, and that the children will know it. They know it already.
Yeah.
So I think we need to build our own plan, and I think that's important. And schools, and you very rightly pointed out, Amita, that the practitioners, they know the child must also express, and together they build a curriculum. There are some schools where they develop a curriculum through the year. Not a set curriculum, not a set syllabus from outside, but the children, the parents, and the teachers for the year are developing what the child will study through the year. I think that should be really good.
Very nice. Ms. Agnihotri, in continuation to what she just said and what you mentioned earlier on the socio-emotional front, So coming to schools or classroom education is more about community experience, where students feed on each other's energy and resources, responses. And it's also about, it's not about academics, but it is all about learning how to socialize and build on life set skills, which you mentioned have socio-emotional skills have hugely been impacted. So, and I'm sure it's again the responsibility of the school and the teachers to help build those. So how can we equip our teachers to help students with their holistic well-being?
Again, one of the things that was, the way the pandemic as an adversity turned into an opportunity was this sort of the world was open to everyone. So teachers have been able to converse and have conversations and understand what's happening across the world. So I think the first thing is that as adults, we really need to understand. And that will come with conversations with a large group of people, with a variety, with all stakeholders, with all caregivers, and in a diverse area. So the first is really to understand, what is it that we're going to face and, what is happening where. In terms of equipping, so of course, teachers should continue with conversations with each other, with parents, with children, with, different generations. And there are a lot of sessions and there are a lot of psychologists and there are a lot of people within the field who have, you've been coming with sessions, with conversations, with, sort of conversations like these, dialogues like these. and all of that continues to happen. But we must understand that the situation is evolving. There are going to be some long-term repercussions. We don't know about that yet. We don't even know about the impact on every child. Because every child is different, every family is different, every teacher is different. So, from where I'm coming from, it might appear different from where you begin to talk to the same child. And all of us have gone through a very different experience. So, say for instance, some have lost members of the family. Some have been on vacations so many times during these 2 years. Some have, lost a grandparent. Children who've lost parents. So each child has had a different experience. Each teacher has had a different experience. Each parent, has gone through that. So this is very evolving. I can't say that, it isn't a
one shoe fit all.
Yeah, it's not a chapter on algebra where I say, come here, let me teach you, the 5 rules and things will work. It will have to evolve. It will have to evolve through conversations, through dialogues, through more practitioners talking about it, through sharing experiences on, broader sort of platforms. And I think we should learn to share with each other. So every teacher and every individual should have the option or the opportunity to share their experiences so that the others can learn from that experience, and also build confidence with the parent community so that we can again continue to support the children. So like I said, those conversations will continue, but I can't think of one workshop or one training which is going to
God bless the
fix
teachers.
that.
I think they will have to continue the process.
Yes. But I think they have been, like she said, troopers the last 2 years, the most resilient community.
Yeah.
And despite everything, they've continued teaching. Everyone went on lockdown. Even doctors went on lockdown for a while. But there was no lockdown for
Truly
teachers.
The unsung heroes of COVID.
Yes.
Yeah, I think everybody recognizes, but it's just not been out in the open. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think now parents are appreciating teachers a lot more, appreciating their education system a lot more. Yeah.
But what I continue to get out of this conversation is that the importance of students coming back to school, parents understanding that, the socio-emotional support that the students need, and how everybody can collaborate and work instead of just focusing on grades or on marks or
even saying
certain subjects.
Even saying 2 chapters kam kar do.
That doesn't matter.
That is not
a solution. No.
Yeah.
Not
or,
at all.
They can't read. They will read. When they feel okay, they will begin to read. Just read them stories. That's what I believe in,
Dr. Vatal, are there any lessons from COVID? Should this be looked as an opportunity to make schools more efficient, equitable, and resilient as we embark upon this whole development and learning project?
Yeah, that's very interesting, the question that you've asked, because you've only taken it into sort of one corridor of learning. But I would say that the greatest lesson that one has learned from COVID is that it has been a great equalizer. Whether it is a Jaguar that you have or a Santro, you were all locked up in the house. It didn't matter. The whole materialistic obsession that everybody had, the whole competition has been thrown out of the window. And I think we needed that as a generation. We needed that as a people, especially in our country, because we're consistently obsessing about competition. And I think it gave us a break to do a lot of self-reflection about what is the purpose of my life? Who am I? And where am I going? What is the purpose of me having children if other people are looking after them? And I think these are very important lessons, because the child itself had got lost. The adult had lost its childhood, and the child had lost its childhood, because the child per se was getting up in the morning, rushing to school, coming back, putting down its bags, rushing to a coaching, coming back, rushing to another coaching. There was absolutely no connect with the parent, And in meeting after meeting, I used to say to parents, have children if you have the time for them. Otherwise, what's the point? I mean, we are not here to sort of send out legacies, we're human beings. We just need to be, and we need to connect with ourselves. So I think that is one of the greatest lessons. The other lesson which came out of this is values. I think, what is it that we value? And what are we going to value in the future? And again, both my friends here have been talking about this value model. Because is it only about the fact that I'm concerned because my child doesn't know how to read or write? But have you thought that your child doesn't know how to think, how to meditate, how to dance, how to be calm, how to paint, how to understand his happiness, his health, her survival? And if education has had nothing to do with all this and only had to do with livelihood, then we are failures as a nation if we have been giving out education. So I think COVID has really been a game changer in that area. It has torn out the curtain. It has shed a spotlight on many of our weaknesses. And that's where our learning is, as parents, as educators, as a community, as a country. This is the way I think.
How lovely. Yeah, thank you. My last question is again to you, Dr. Patil. With every challenge, we do see that there are certain bright sparks of hope that come. Yeah. So are there any wins to celebrate that have come out of the learning struggle that we've endeavored for the last 2 years? Could you share, some of those as far as all stakeholders are concerned?
No, there have been some very bright moments. I would say that the word open has really come into focus because we have broken all barriers of space, time. Because our children, if it's a child, then the child is connected with children across the world. The whole MUN experience that we used to talk of, Richa. It could have been done completely online, and a child could have connected with another child in Croatia and Hungary. We wouldn't have had to just had little, elite clusters working in the India International Center in Delhi or wherever. So children have been able to connect with their colleagues across the world. They've been able to understand composite cultures. They've been able to learn languages. I know of a lot of children who've learned instruments, who've learned languages, who've learned how to cook differently, who've learned how to adapt. In fact, the same child who used to just refuse to do any housework has now become a sous chef in the making, or has become a person who's become mom's biggest helper, a dishwasher, and all sorts of things rolled into one without feeling undermined. So there's been a lot of development in character. There's also been a lot of mental development because in many ways, technology has really taken you into a huge leap into cyberspace. And the adults have also been transformed, as mentioned, because the adults too, whether it's their workplaces or their homes or their professions, they've learned a completely new way of how to go forward with their jobs, with themselves. Teachers have learned, as Richa mentioned, through each other, through peer learning. And the greatest thing is the sharing that happened during this time, which was absolutely spectacular. You had great minds who, if you were able to connect with through an email, they would come back to you and they would speak to you. I mean, I know that just before Ken Robinson passed away, and he's a great educator, he came in and he said, yes, I will talk on creativity. Otherwise, getting Ken Robinson to India would mean thousands and thousands of rupees, So there have been some remarkable scientists, philosophers, thinkers, heads of universities across the country. And I'm talking about these because these are what affect children, what affect thinking people. They've just come in and shared. And nobody said, I want $1,000 for speaking, or because earlier on you called a speaker, everybody wanted money. I think we're going back into the mold now, unfortunately. But in these 2 years, people said, I don't know what life and time is. I don't know how long. Yeah. And the uncertainty. And so there was a lot of sharing and generosity that I saw with people on the street, with people in the homes. Yes. And so I think, yes, there have been great lessons that have been learned during the...
If I can add to what Amita is saying, museums opened. So, so much learning happened. Resources were open to people across, to do what they want to. And I think this whole shift of technology in education, it was sort of sitting there, waiting to be picked up. And that's come in. And, there's no going back. You can't go back to the blackboard now. You will have to bring in technology, as a part of your learning, as a part of your education. So that is there to stay. And that's a language that children understand. So, that is the other thing which has happened. And one really important thing is as the focus of the world has shifted to education. So education and healthcare, which were, we always talk about them. But they've suddenly, come to the forefront. So everyone has some stake there. And so that focus has come to education. And if that stays, whether it's a political you get political mileage out of it or whatever be the reason, if that stays, I think that's going to speak
Richa,
volumes.
My concern is that in these 2 years, India was the first to close down schools and the last to open. I really felt extremely disturbed by that. And as you mentioned, all over the world schools were open. They were opened in clusters, they were open in little sort of zones, they were open in balloons. One child got it, doesn't matter, he went home, they carried on, and again they reopened. But I think these lockdowns for schooling has played havoc. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to sound alarmist, but in the next 10 years, we will see this in the livelihoods, in the fact that children will not be able to have discussions, will not be able to communicate very well because there will be issues about how do you hold interviews, what is it? Because there's a lot of human connect that is required in a school. A school is a socializing place, and they've just been closed. And hopefully, it shouldn't, but it will. It will affect the way livelihoods move, as far as whether it's in the villages or it's in the rural or the urban India, it will affect this kind of school closure that we've seen. And I just appeal to the government, and I appeal again to the parent, that don't get into this mold of, just letting Shiksha be the last. Shiksha has to be the first. Because this is your legacy. These are your children who are going to make a difference to the planet. We're going to go. If we don't educate them, what kind of hopes, aspirations will they have?
Sure.
So that's very important.
All the time we have today for this discussion. To prevent learning losses from accumulating, it is important that the curriculum and teaching methodology adjust to meet students' learning needs. Reconnecting with the kids and encouraging them to work in groups with their peers. Supporting parents to build on the momentum of joint partnership between teachers, students, and schools, and empowering teachers with all support needed could all be critical as we reimagine education. What is heartening to see is how our children and young people express greater optimism in the face of challenges. And that is something to hold on to even as we move ahead and do our best to make these big shifts and narrow the learning gaps. Thank you, Dr. Amita Vatal, Ms. Richa Agnihotri, Dr. Ram, for joining us today here.